This is going to be the case for the resurrection of Jesus, part 3. Thomas Kissinger here with you, and we've been highlighting the book written by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona that is entitled the same thing, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. We're going to pick up where we left off, and we're commenting on the book. I've summarized it in a writing of mine that's soon to come out in the Noble Berean Series, Volume 4. And we've been going through the 5 facts that he outlines, and this is fact number 3, that Paul was suddenly changed. According to Gary Habermas and Michael Licona, thus, Paul's notorious pre-Christian activities and conversion are multiply attested. We have Paul's own testimony, Luke's record in Acts, and a story that was circulating among Christians in Judea. We must now ask the question, what caused this change in Paul? Why did one who persecuted Christians suddenly become one? Both Paul himself and Luke report that it was because he firmly believed that he had experienced an encounter with the risen Jesus. Paul's conversion is so interesting because he was an enemy of the church when he claimed to have seen the risen Jesus. Thus, Jesus' resurrection is testified to by friends and also a foe. His belief that he had witnessed the risen Christ was so strong that he, like the original disciples, was willing to suffer continuously for the sake of the gospel, even to the point of martyrdom. This point is well documented, reported by Paul himself, as well as Luke, Clement of Rome, Polycarp, Tertullian, Dionysius of Corinth, and Origen. Therefore, we have early multiple and first-hand testimony that Paul converted from being a staunch opponent of Christianity to one of its greatest proponents. End quote, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, Gary Habermas and Michael Licona. In summary of this, Paul's conversion, willingness to suffer, and martyrdom is attested to by his conversion story, Paul himself, the book of Acts, early Christians in Judea, Galatians, in the book of Galatians, his suffering and martyrdom, and as we mentioned, is attested to by Paul, Luke, Clement of Rome, Polycarp, Tertullian, Dionysius of Corinth, the quote is found in Eusebius, and Origen, the quote is also found in Eusebius. Fact number 4, James was suddenly changed. Habermas and Licona state that the Gospels report that Jesus had at least 4 brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, plus unnamed sisters. Josephus, the Jewish historian from the 1st century, mentions the brother of Jesus who was called the Christ, whose name was James. The conversion of James is attributed to 4 things as outlined and detailed by Habermas and Licona in the following information below, including the list of bullet points. We do not have the same wealth of historical information on the life of James that we have for Paul. However, we have enough information to conclude that after the alleged event of Jesus' resurrection, James, the brother of Jesus, became a convert to Christianity because he believed the risen Jesus appeared to him. Habermas and Licona base their conclusion on the Gospels report that Jesus' brothers, including James, were unbelievers during his ministry. The ancient creedal material in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7 that we discussed earlier lists an appearance of the risen Jesus to James. Then he appeared to James. Subsequent to the alleged events of Jesus' resurrection, James is identified as a leader of the Jerusalem church that's outlined in Acts 15, 12-21 and Galatians 1:19. Not only did James convert to Christianity, his beliefs in Jesus and his resurrection were so strong that he died as a martyr because of them. James's martyrdom is attested by Josephus, Hegesippus, and Clement of Alexandria. We no longer have any of the works of Hegesippus or the writings of Clement where the event is mentioned. However, sections have been preserved by Eusebius. Therefore, his martyrdom is attested by both Christian and non-Christian sources. In summary of this, James's conversion, willingness to suffer, and martyrdom is attested by his conversion. And then before the Gospels report Jesus' brothers were unbelievers prior to his resurrection, early creed reports appearance of risen Jesus to James. And then after, Paul and Acts identify James as a leader in the church. His suffering and martyrdom, attested to by Josephus, Hegesippus, and Clement of Alexandria, that are both outlined in Eusebius. Fact number 5, the tomb was empty. According to Habermas and Lacona, the empty tomb of Jesus does not meet our two criteria of being a minimal fact because it is not accepted by nearly every scholar who studies the subject. Nevertheless, there is strong evidence for it, and it is accepted as a fact of history by an impressive majority of critical scholars. Gary Habermas discovered that roughly 75% of scholars on the subject accept the empty tomb as a historical fact. End quote, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, Gary Habermas and Michael Lacona. Habermas and Lacona present 3 arguments for the empty tomb. They are the Jerusalem factor, enemy attestation, and the testimony of women. The Jerusalem factor. As stated by Habermas and Lacona, it would have been impossible for Christianity to get off the ground in Jerusalem if the body had still been in the tomb. If Acts is correct, the disciples began to proclaim the risen Jesus approximately 50 days after Jesus' crucifixion. In short, if a body of any sort was discovered in the tomb, the Christian message of an empty tomb would have been falsified. Anything but an empty tomb would have been devastating to the resurrection account. The whole point of the Jerusalem factor is that if the resurrection was a hoax, all that the enemies of Jesus had to do was simply produce and publicly display the dead body of Jesus to prove it was just that, a hoax. But Jewish, Roman, and all other writings are absent of such an account. No corpse has ever been produced. Enemy attestation. According to Gary Habermas and Michael Lacona, the empty tomb is attested not only by Christian sources, Jesus' enemies admitted as well, albeit indirectly. Hence, we are not employing an argument from silence. Rather than point to an occupied tomb, early critics accuse Jesus' disciples of stealing the body. Matthew 28:12 through 13, Justin Martyr. There's some other details that outline that there, but there would have been no need to account for a missing body if the body had still been in the tomb. When the boy tells the teacher that the dog ate his homework, this is an indirect admission that his homework is unavailable for assessment. Likewise, the earliest Jewish claim reported regarding Jesus' resurrection was to accuse the disciples of stealing the body, an indirect admission that the body was unavailable for public display. This is the only early opposing theory we know of that was offered by Jesus' enemies. End quote, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, Gary Habermas and Michael Lacona. The testimony of women. The fact that women are listed as primary witnesses of the empty tomb is quite fascinating. According to Habermas and Lacona, if someone concocted a story in an attempt to deceive others, we presume that they would not knowingly invent data that could hurt the credibility of their story. To further clarify their point, Habermas and Lacona go on to say, when we come to the account of the empty tomb, women are listed as the primary witnesses. They are not only the first witnesses mentioned. They are also mentioned in all 4 Gospels, whereas male witnesses appear only later and in 2 Gospels. This would be an odd invention since in both Jewish and Roman cultures, women were lowly esteemed and their testimony was regarded as questionable. certainly not as credible as a man's. So we'll stop there, and some very powerful things we've brought across, some facts that have been outlined about the case for the resurrection of Jesus. It's quite a case, and the facts are very strong in the probability of the resurrection of our Lord Jesus.